We recently got our first look at gameplay in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and it was filled with tons of details for us to go over. So, you know what that means. It's time we power up the old analysis machine to see what secrets and hidden details we can find. In part 2 of this analysis, we'll be taking a closer look at the gameplay mechanics themselves, among several other things. So let's start by focusing on Link. His new abilities were the main highlight of this gameplay demonstration, starting with Recall, which allows Link to reverse an object's motion. We see him use it on rubble fallen from the Sky Islands to go back up to them, and when the object has finished its recall, it stays in place momentarily before following its original movement. So in this case, the rubble falls back down towards the surface. We saw a bit of recall in action in previous trailers, including in a similar fashion to rise into the sky, as well as to reverse a spike ball back towards enemies. But now we know that once the recall is done, the object will resume its original movements again. We can also see that Link can stop the recall early with the L button. This might be why we see these sort of after images of the object's motions. Stopping early will stop it in one of these. Or, of course, it could just be to show the path of the object. Regardless, stopping recall early could be helpful, say, to reach other locations, especially if you don't want to go all the way back to an object's origins. Next up, let's talk about the Ascend ability. According to Aonuma, though there are some limitations, if there's a ceiling above you, you can rise up and pass through it to the ground above. Presumably, this works for platforms too, something above you that isn't too high up. Despite this, we can see the ability seems like it could be activated anywhere, but just because it could be activated doesn't mean it could be used. Sorta like activating Cryonis in Breath of the Wild when there's no water around. Not much you can do in that situation. Anyway though, it does get grayed out at times, for a few frames while Link is falling, while gliding, and more. But it's not instantaneous. It waits a good second before graying out when gliding. Could it be used in that time? It won't even gray out when Link is pushed and hit stun, but it does when he's free falling through the sky. Yet, it reappears for a moment when Link hits the water. So, could it be used during this time? Well, we think no. It would be strange to activate the ability in the air if there's nothing above you to ascend to. And if Link is rising back up to the water anyway, there's not much reason to use it underwater either. It's called Ascend, so we're inclined to believe it can only be used to go up, and it won't work to also go down. Now, Aonuma mentions the hypothetical situation of being trapped in a cage, but the ability can get you out of the cage if it has a ceiling. Was this just hypothetical, or is this something that can happen in Tears of the Kingdom? We can't think of any instances where you were trapped in a cage in Breath of the Wild, and we can't help but think of this coming up in a potential stealth section, where perhaps getting caught gets you thrown in a cell or a cage, but rather than using a crawl space to escape, you use the Ascend ability. Anyway, we had a glimpse of this ability back in the second trailer for the game, when Link used it up on a sky island. Moving on, let's talk about the Ultrahand. No, not that Ultrahand, Link's Ultrahand. This ability allows Link to pick up various objects and even attach them together. When activated, surrounding objects glow to signify that they can be lifted. The nearby logs and fans, this barrel in the background, but also possibly the structures in the background. We saw what was presumably Ultrahand being used to rotate a piece of a puzzle in the last trailer. So perhaps this ability would be used to move and rotate different objects or puzzles, even if they won't be connected together. Now, speaking of connecting them together, this was how the various crafted vehicles we saw in the previous trailer were made. Link used this ability to grab the large wheel out of the mud. Objects moved close together with the Ultrahand will be automatically connected. They can also be easily separated and moved around if need be. The green putty will be automatically applied or removed, so it's not a separate thing that Link needs to do. So the car that we saw in the previous trailer was made from wheels and other materials found around, such as wood from these construction sites. Speaking of, what are these sites? With the sign next to them and the close proximity to stables, they feel like foundations for houses. Of course, you can seemingly steal the materials for your own inventions, unless Link used the car to transport these materials in the first place, since we know these crafts can be taken apart as well. So what's up with these? Can we build houses or homes this way for people? What if we get a Terrytown situation across all of Hyrule? As much as I'm loving the different ideas for what we can craft with Ultrahand, I have a feeling we cannot fully build houses for people. It would be pretty messed up if they were simply held together with Link's green goo, ready to be disassembled at any moment. Now that just doesn't sound structurally sound. Anyway, moving on from the Ultrahand, let's talk about perhaps the biggest of Link's new abilities, Fusion. Link can fuse nearby objects with his equipment. Doing so will increase their durability and strength, as seen when he fuses a boulder to the tree branch. The attack power of the weapon has increased by 2. But the question with fusing these weapons is how the new durability works. Does this replenish the durability of a weapon, replacing it with a whole new durability value? Well, we think yes. We're pretty sure if you take a weapon that's nearly broken and fuse it with something else, that new weapon won't be nearly broken. Anyway, the fusion ability actually explains some clips in earlier trailers, including this one where Link has a fire-breathing dragon head attached to a shield, and this one where he launches an explosive at the end of a long weapon. And in this gameplay demonstration, we see Link fuse a boulder to his tree branch, a farmer's pitchfork to a long stick, a log with a wooden stick, and his old wooden shield with a rock in one instance, and a puff shroom in another. But there's one question that comes to mind with these fusions. How many times can we fuse weapons? Nintendo of Europe says 2 items in a tweet, but Nintendo of America doesn't specify. Could we fuse items together multiple times to create bizarre weapons and creations? Or would selecting the log club replace the fusion altogether with this new one? But Link can fuse to more than just his sword and shield. He can attach materials to arrows as well. We see him attach a Korok frond, though we don't know what it does, as well as an ice choo-choo jelly to make an ice arrow, and a Keese eyeball to make a homing arrow, which explains the homing arrow we saw in the previous trailer too. But what other properties could you apply to arrows? Presumably, a red choo-choo jelly works like a fire arrow, and a yellow choo-choo jelly works like a shock arrow. But what would putting raw meat on the arrow do? Act as bait for enemies or wild animals? And what would putting a Hyrule herb on an arrow do? Maybe some fusions are entirely useless, but it's up to the player to experiment with their resources and materials to see what they can create and if they're useful. Speaking of materials, let's go over all of the ones that we see here in Tears of the Kingdom. After all, they're an important part of Link's equipment, especially with this new fusion ability. We see a Stamella shroom, some yellow and blue mushrooms that seem like a color variation of the Hylian shrooms, puff shrooms, stam bulbs, a Zonai charge, a soldier construct horn, and a bug that Link has yet to pick up, so it only shows question marks. But we see a lot more when Link opens up his material menu to fuse with his arrows. Stamella shrooms, Hylian shrooms, the blue mushrooms yet again, Hyrule herbs, some sort of leek, a Korok frond, raw meat, amber, which now has a much sharper, smaller shape to it, white choo-choo jelly, blue choo-choo jelly, Keese eyeballs, Keese wings, soldier construct horns, another form of construct horn that's much longer and more wavy, some sort of white and green orb, and another material to the right, but we can't see enough of it to tell what it is, other than that this part of it on the left is white. So while we see a fair amount of returning materials from Breath of the Wild, we also see some brand new ones here in Tears of the Kingdom. Clearly, there are once again a lot of things that Link can stuff in his pockets. Now, we're almost done talking about Link and his abilities, equipment, and more, but there are still a few details that we need to focus in on. First up, pretty much the only piece of equipment we haven't talked about yet, this bow. It seems like it was made by a construct, given the green stone look to it. And another quick point, while Link is gliding, he can press the R button to dive. This probably not only drops the paraglider, but likely sends Link into the accelerated fall that we see later in gameplay. Okay, there's 2 more big things about Link. The first are these glowing vials kept at his hip. In every instance that we've seen them before, we see 4 of them filled up on top, and 4 empty slots below for 8 total. But in this gameplay demonstration, we can just barely make out that Link has only 1 slot filled in. So this is likely further indication that this gameplay demonstration is from pretty early in the game, perhaps just after clearing the tutorial area since Link has 4 hearts. The other big detail about Link is this battery. When he activates the fan, a battery icon appears and begins to drain, but it's not displayed over the machine, it's over Link. So it's probably tied to Link and his powers. When the machine is turned off, the battery begins to recharge. And later, when this larger raft gets activated, the battery starts with a steady decrease. But as soon as it lifts into the air, it begins to drain much faster. So this must be upgradable in order to make it actually useful, because this flying contraption barely gets off the water before the battery is nearly drained. And that would be awfully risky with the flying machines from the previous trailer. So how do you upgrade the battery? Well, I think it's actually tied to these vials that Link has. The more vials of energy he has, the more his power can be used on his surroundings, and the longer this battery gauge lasts. And that about does it for Link, so let's shift focus away from our hero and onto the constructs. Brand new creatures that were shown off in this gameplay demonstration. We see Link battle a few of them, and according to the material drops, these are soldier constructs. We also see a few of them on the surface when Link is riding his horse. So they're not only on the Sky Islands, but they've come to the surface as well. And like bokoblins, moblins, and other monsters, they can wield a variety of weapons. The first one Link battles uses a tree branch, and the next pair use a wooden stick and a long stick, but most of the others in this gameplay use wooden sticks. Though, we do see one equipped with a fused weapon, seemingly a wooden stick fused with these wood planks, functioning like a large fan. Can the constructs fuse weapons themselves, or are some items just found fused in the world? Not all constructs are enemies though. In fact, we see some that are friendly NPCs. Link gets near this ranger construct and the talk option appears. And we can see a few others that we're pretty sure are rangers too. On the far right before Link's first fight, just off screen while Link builds the raft, and one here in this cave. They seem to be digging, perhaps searching for materials? But notably, these ranger constructs seem pretty familiar. They look very similar to the stone creature we saw back in the E3 2021 trailer. It has the same bulbs on its head, a serpent-like head, long neck, long arms and hands, and a bell-shaped body with the opening in the front. It may not be exactly the same thing, but I definitely think this is some form of ranger construct as well. Speaking of different forms, the official Zelda Twitter account posted some official artwork of a construct, but it looks pretty different. What is this, an ARMS character? Anyway, the general design is that of a soldier construct, but this one has 3 stacked eyes instead of 1, so it's likely a more powerful version, similar to, say, the blue bokoblins versus the red ones. This one has a bow in one hand, seemingly the same kind of bow that we see Link using in fact, and a flamethrower in the other. This looks a lot like the flaming stone dragon head that we see Link fuse to his shield in an earlier trailer, so it seems that these will be obtainable from enemies. We also see some ruined remains of constructs during the Ascend demonstration, but why are these ancient ruined remains just left here, while others are roaming around the islands? It sort of reminds me of the ancient robots in Skyward Sword, left as ruined remains in the present, but lively when in range of a timeshift stone. But no, this may not be a hint to time travel. It could be similar to how Breath of the Wild had guardians roaming around Hyrule, even though some were abandoned and broken across the land. Finally, though we don't know for sure if it's a construct or something else entirely, remember the large stone golem we saw in the last trailer, made out of a bunch of large cubes? Well, we can actually see one in the distance during the Ascend clips. There's a large platform in the background that seems fit for a battlefield, and a ton of stone blocks stacked together. Approaching it might be similar to other large monsters in Hyrule, like a Hinox or Stone Talus, and it'll wake up and assemble if you get too close. Okay, we're almost done here, but there's a few other details we wanted to talk about. First up is this cooking pot in the cave. It's actually different than the ones found on the surface of Hyrule, matching more of the stone architecture from the surrounding buildings. It's just a neat detail that we thought was cool. But perhaps more interesting is this purple cloud near the dueling peaks. There's some sort of shape below it as well. It seems like the same kind of magical energy given off by the Great Fairies, but there were no Great Fairies by the dueling peaks in Breath of the Wild. The closest one was just outside of Kakariko Village. So have they moved? Well, we know they can move in Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, so it's possible that the Great Fairies have relocated to different areas. Moving on, some Sky Islands are very close to the surface of Hyrule. This one up ahead has the golden leaf trees on it, floating slightly above the mountain. So it's nice to see that there will be a lot of verticality when it comes to this game. It's not as simple as the surface of Hyrule and the islands up in the sky. Just getting to this one island doesn't necessarily mean you can get to the others, at least from this one. But speaking of the Sky Islands, it seems that objects will randomly fall from the sky, and these can be used to go back up to the sky using recall. This was what we saw at the end of the previous trailer, an object falling from the sky. So presumably, Link can go up to that, use recall on it, and rise up to wherever it originated from. Now, I want to take a quick moment to talk about the music, because we actually heard some of the same songs from Breath of the Wild. The horse riding theme sounds about the same, as well as the stable music. And when Link stands in the unbearable cold, it plays the same cold music from Breath of the Wild. But not all of the music is the same. We hear what might be some new ambient before recall is used, new battle music against the constructs, and perhaps most notably, a different take on the main theme when we see Aonuma on screen.
What did you think? Some of Link's new abilities were updated from the previous game. I'm sure some of you watching me play were thinking, wait, if you could do that, then maybe you could do this too. In this game, you can do a lot of things just by thinking about what's even possible. There's still a lot of new gameplay, mysteries, and encounters we couldn't show today, but they're all jam-packed into this unfamiliar Hyrule, and we hope you'll use your imagination to explore it. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.
It's a much more dramatic sounding version of the main theme, and in fact, it reminds me of the Dark Beast Ganon battle in Breath of the Wild, which used that game's main theme. Could this be part of Tears of the Kingdom's final battle theme?
What did you think?
And finally, let's talk a little bit about the Zonai. The Zonai are described to be an ancient race that has long since disappeared from Hyrule. The Zonai ruins can be found in the Faron region, to the south of the long serpentine river leading to the Spring of Courage. But their influence can be found all over Hyrule, such as the dragon statues found in various ruins, including the Thundra Plateau, Spring of Courage, Lomai Labyrinths, and so much more. There are a lot more in-depth theories and evidence of the Zonai in Breath of the Wild, so I'll direct you to our friends Nintendo Black Crisis and HMK Zilla for that. They've done some good videos on them. But regardless, it's clear that the Zonai would be playing a potentially significant role in Tears of the Kingdom. If they're powering these constructs, are they still around? What ties do they have to the Sky Islands? Their very presence alone may have a significant impact on the story of this game, and frankly, I'm really excited to find out more. And with that, that is everything we can find from the Tears of the Kingdom gameplay. This game looks incredible, and I can't wait to play it myself. If you want more and missed the first part of this analysis focused on the HUD and map, make sure to go check that out. But with that, thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned to GameXplain for plenty more on The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Until next time, farewell.